Stop. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. What are you doing with those boxes, Jason? Emma, with her keen eye, noticed everything at once. Just trying to get the damn things through the door, I muttered, trying to tackle the empty cardboard containers. She jumped up and held the door for me, realizing the situation. Marco fired you, she exclaimed, surprise and concern audible in her voice. Yes, and now I have to pack somehow, I mumbled, hastily filling boxes with my personal belongings, trying not to leave anything that belonged to the company. He can't just fire you like that. Without you, everything will fall apart, she protested, devotion evident in her voice. I didn't bother answering her. Emma silently began to help me pack. She noticed me tossing a picture of my wife, Chloe, into the trash. Emma had been my secretary for 2 years. I would miss her. She had a glass eye that never seemed to sit still and constantly flew off on its own. It would often tear, and she was constantly moisturizing it with drops. 3 years ago, Emma was in a car accident that killed her husband and her right eye. Now she stays stuck in this dreary office to support her 2 young sons, Richard, 8 years old, and Michael, 2 years younger. Jason, what on earth happened? You just went home to grab another pair of glasses. He can't fire you for that. I finished packing up my few belongings, needing only 1 box. Marco, Romano, and Chloe were in our bed when I got home. They weren't doing anything at that point, but it was clear right away. He fired you because you caught him with your wife. Not quite. I kicked him out of my house first, and then he fired me. He didn't leave. Chloe and Marco were still in our bed when I left. Marco was laughing as I walked out the door. Emma, one eye on me, put her hand on my shoulder. She didn't say anything. I smiled and left the building. Romano Mowers would have to do without Jason Livingston. I doubted they were concerned. My brother Paul wasn't home, but his wife, Grace, was more than willing to offer their spare room. Paul worked an early shift at the tire plant and would be home in the afternoon. Grace comforted me with coffee and a sympathetic ear until Paul arrived. After a quick lunch, we went to my place to get my things. Marco was gone, and Chloe was sitting in the kitchen with a drink. What were you thinking, coming home in the middle of the morning like that, Jason? I couldn't believe she asked such a foolish question. I was afraid Marco was going to run out of defense. I was just bringing him another dozen. Don't act like a know-it-all. It's not that significant, and it's nothing surprising. What do you mean? Marco was going to fire you 2 years ago. He agreed to let you stay if I agreed to cheat on you with him. So I did, just so you could keep your job. Aren't you saying you've been cheating on me with him for the past 2 years? Chloe glanced at me with a slight smirk and finished her drink. Well, it wasn't all that terrible. You kept your job, and I got to spend time with Marco. Now that I've lost my job, are you going to stop seeing him? Don't be ridiculous. Why would I do that? I couldn't believe what she had just admitted, but it certainly cleared up a lot of things. I looked at Paul, and we both headed to the bedroom to pack my things. There wasn't much I wanted to take from the house, so it didn't take long. Since I wasn't much of a handyman, there weren't many tools or power equipment. The last item I carried out was the desktop computer. Chloe remained seated at the kitchen table throughout our visit, her glass mysteriously refilling itself. She stayed silent, her appearance showing signs of wear and tear. Her long hair, dyed an eerie black, gave her a sort of gothic or witch-like aura. Despite her olive complexion, her thin face seemed hardened. Her lips were tightly pressed together, avoiding eye contact with me as she stared at the wall opposite her. I couldn't discern whether her anger was directed at my departure or at being caught cheating. Either way, it didn't matter. After Paul and I finished moving, we stopped for a quick beer to mark the successful completion of the task, although it felt like a feeble excuse to drink in the middle of the day. Thankfully, the house was just a rental, which was a small relief. Disconnecting utilities took about an hour, and I managed to get a few deposits back. Sorting out bank accounts and credit cards came next. I left half of our savings and checking accounts for Chloe. When we returned home, Grace had prepared a wonderful dinner. Later that night, Paul helped me get drunk and put me to bed. It was the first hangover I'd had in years. I wasn't expecting any severance pay from Romano Mowers, but I had enough saved up to last a few months. Unemployment compensation was out of the question, so finding another job was a must. I decided to start the divorce paperwork first, which took up the whole morning. After lunch, I headed to the state employment office, holding out hope that they might have something for me. "Hey, Jason, fancy seeing you here," said Emma, nicknamed Emma One Eye, as she stood before me with a clipboard. "Did you leave on your own?" I asked. "No, I got replaced by big breasts and big hair," she replied bitterly. I shook my head, knowing it was a cruel move from Marco. Emma had nothing to do with the situation, and it wasn't fair for her to be let go. "What exactly went down?" "Marco replaced you with his brother Matteo, and I got replaced by Matteo's girlfriend. I was out by the end of the day. I'm sorry. Is there anything I can do? Could I use you as a reference?" We both shared a small laugh. Emma and I sat together, filling out the mustard-colored employment history forms. Neither of us had much faith in the system, but we felt obligated to go through the motions. Before we left, I slipped her a couple of $100 and my phone number. She hesitated but eventually accepted it with a meek thank you. Being a single mom with 2 young boys and no job ahead was going to be tough. For the next week, I scoured the area for any potential job opportunities, but came up empty-handed. After receiving a scathing call from Chloe about the disconnected utilities, I decided to change my cell phone number. Jenkins Farm Equipment was located about 3 miles outside of town. Most of the farms in the area had been sold off to developers, leaving ranch houses in place of the once sprawling cornfields. The place looked like it had seen better days, with peeling paint, worn-out signs, and a parking lot in dire need of repair. Even the windows could use a good cleaning. Despite its run-down appearance, it was my last hope. Donald Jenkins, the owner, was well into his 60s and quite overweight. He sat behind his desk, resembling Santa Claus without the beard. I was dressed for an interview, so he could tell I wasn't there to buy farm equipment. "If you're not buying, you must be selling." "I'm not interested," he said bluntly. I can't argue with that. "I was just hoping for a free cup of coffee," I replied casually. My remark earned a faint chuckle from him as he pointed to the coffee urn in the corner. Taking a seat across from him, I lifted my styrofoam cup in a mock toast and nodded. "Thanks, it's a small comfort after a rough week." Donald Jenkins gave me a quizzical look. "Don't I know you? You're that living good fellow who works for Romano, right?" "Livingston. I used to work at Romano's. I'm not employed anywhere right now." After a brief pause, he said, "I never did like that Romano guy or his brother." We both sat there for a moment, neither of us saying anything, just enjoying the coffee. "Are you sure I can't interest you in a harvester? I can give you a good deal on last year's model." There was a twinkle in his eye, like he was Santa Claus. I found myself scanning the room. Outside the window, I could see a large warehouse and an even larger storage yard. There was a notable absence of merchandise. The showroom was completely empty. I assumed he let the inventory dwindle due to slow sales. I didn't know much about farm machinery, but something felt off. His booming voice snapped me out of my thoughts. "You look like you're thinking of buying the place. Are you going to make me an offer?" "In my dreams." Jenkins leaned back in his chair and grinned. 7 or 8 years ago, Romano's operation was terrible. It only started improving when he hired you. Isn't that right? He was correct, but I wasn't about to admit it. I knew the difference I made for Marco. And apparently, others noticed too. All I could do was smile as I tossed my empty cup into the trash can. I was still smiling as I stood up to leave. "Don't rush off, Mr. Livingston. We might be able to work something out." 2 hours later, Donald Jenkins and I reached an agreement. He had ambitious plans but needed someone like me to execute them. Money wasn't an issue for him, and I was eager to assist with one condition. I could hire my own assistant. Emma One Eye would be delighted with the news. That evening, I treated Paul and Grace to dinner at Red Lobster. The weight of Chloe's actions was fading rapidly. After I called her, I think Emma was even happier than I was. Upon our return home, Chloe awaited me. She spent 20 minutes trying to persuade me to return to our place. It seemed Marco wasn't keen on supporting his wife, family, and Chloe. I politely listened to her entire argument, smiled, and walked into the house without saying a word. The following weeks were hectic. The main building was entirely concrete block. The second floor, a 3-bedroom apartment, had been used for storage for the last 20 years. Donald graciously allowed me to live there rent-free. Emma One Eye helped me procure a stove, refrigerator, and washing machine. Together, Emma and I cleaned and painted the office and apartment. I hired a couple of high school kids to paint the outbuildings. Donald didn't complain about the expenses. It was enjoyable, but eventually we had to get down to productive work. Chloe called Grace and informed her that she received and signed the divorce papers. It was a straightforward process since we didn't own the house and had no children. I had already given her half of the assets. Not much for 12 years of marriage, but it was all she deserved. Emma One Eye was a slender woman with poor teeth and a prosthetic eye. Her hair, a dirty blonde, seemed untouched by any salon. Makeup wasn't her forte either. Though she maintained cleanliness, she needed some serious upkeep. However, her voice was smooth as honey, and her work ethic made me feel inadequate. Her computer and accounting skills were exceptional, making her a valuable asset. One perk of working for someone who thinks they're the smartest is they usually aren't. Romano Mowers had no confidentiality or proprietary agreements because Marco believed he didn't need them. Unfortunately for him, it left Emma and me with freedom. Emma simply informed our business contacts, both wholesalers and retailers, that we were no longer with Romano Mowers and couldn't provide service. She made sure not to solicit any business. Meanwhile, I contacted all of Donald's contacts to see if any were still active. Most had dwindled over the years, with some going out of business. Donald had written off the farm equipment operation entirely, with no intention of reviving it. I came across a Korean manufacturer looking for U.S. distributors for gang mowers. While they weren't particularly high-tech, they were robust and affordable, making them perfect for small municipalities and school districts. After a 30-minute phone call, I secured 50 units on consignment from California. With space to stock them and no upfront cost, it was a win-win. They rushed a box of sales brochures to us via overnight express, and Emma One Eye promptly took charge. Before the first load even arrived, we had 6 orders. The following week, Emma began reaching out to each recipient of the sales letters. It was hard to tell who was happier to hear from her, the wholesalers or the retailers. She was just laying the groundwork, but she was exceptionally good at it. Although we were initially focused on the residential lawn care market, branching out seemed natural. Despite Marco's reluctance, I managed to line up 3 rototiller companies by the end of the first week, 2 of which were open to consignment deals. Our first floor showroom was ready for some new products. I didn't expect gardening equipment, but Donald was thrilled when Emma One Eye signed up 2 chainsaw manufacturers. An old friend of Donald's even arrived with a truckload of new chipper shredders, also open to a consignment arrangement. In no time, Donald had a stock of fresh merchandise to offer. On Monday morning, Donald introduced me to our new salesman. He was a retiree willing to work on commission only. He declared he wouldn't accept payment if he didn't make any sales. His first day brought in 3 gang mowers and a chipper. Business was on the rise. Emma One Eye was swamped with work and asked if she could come in on Saturday. Since I'd be there anyway, I agreed. With no school or daycare available, she had to bring her boys along. I've always enjoyed having kids around. They spent most of the day in the apartment watching TV, but their highlight was going out back with Donald to spot groundhogs. Emma mentioned they talked about it all the way home. As summer approached, Emma's boys were out of school. She brought them to work every day. Donald kept them occupied outside, as our business was situated on Donald's family orchard, mostly filled with old apple trees. I set up bunk beds in one room for the boys and a twin bed in another just in case. It wasn't difficult to persuade Emma and the boys to stay overnight. With the nearby top-rated elementary school, convincing Emma to move into the apartment before the new school year was easy. Actually, I think it was her idea. As a thank you for the offer, she rewarded me with a small kiss. Things were definitely looking up. Somehow, Marco discovered where I was working. Matteo's girlfriend had been using the company computer to download pirated movies and ended up with some nasty viruses. Marco called, asking if I could come by and fix the system. I could barely contain my laughter as I hung up. He was lucky I didn't sue him for causing problems in my personal life, or for wrongful dismissal. Donald had kept company medical coverage for years, even when he had no employees. Emma was thrilled when she found out she now had dental coverage. She began spending one afternoon a week at the dentist's office. Initially, there were no visible changes, but over time, she started looking better. The real transformation occurred when Donald arranged for her to see an ocularist. Her poorly fitting prosthesis had been the problem all along. Once she had the right size, the difference was remarkable. Emma one-eyed became just Emma. For her birthday, Donald and I treated her to a full-day beauty treatment at Maya Bennett's salon in Philly while the boys and I enjoyed a fun afternoon at the zoo. It was a great day. Chloe called me for help. Her car was being repossessed, her cell phone service cut off, and she was behind on rent in her furnished studio apartment. I left her all the furniture from our house, though I'm not sure what she did with it. Marco ignored her calls, and she was barred from the company building. I tried to be polite and understanding, but I had to explain that I couldn't help her. She didn't like it, but she had no other options. The divorce would be finalized in a week, and I was eagerly counting down the days. We had hoped that the business would pick up thanks to the retailers, but it turned out the other way around. Tornado Mowers was the first manufacturer to reach out to us. There were 9 retailers in the area working with Romano mowers, but they were dissatisfied and seeking a change. 6 of them were aware of our new venture and recommended that Tornado reach out to us. By the end of the day, we had become the official wholesale distributors of Tornado mowers for the Tri-County area. It was our first significant breakthrough. The following day, my divorce was finalized. Things started falling into place after that. One by one, the wholesalers and retailers who used to work with Romano mowers started coming to us. Emma hired an assistant to help in the office. A few weeks later, I heard a commotion out by the equipment lot. 2 men got out of a pickup truck and began unloading something from the bed. After a few moments, 2 Molotov cocktails were thrown across the lot. The arsonists waited until the fire erupted and then rushed back to their truck. However, they were met with a surprise. Before they could reach the truck, 2 shotgun blasts rang out, and the front tires of their truck went flat as pancakes. I turned on the outside floodlights, and there was Donald standing there, laughing. 2 shadows were sprinting down the road as fast as they could. The police easily found the owner of the truck, who eagerly implicated the Romano brothers for hiring him. This marked the downfall of Romano mowers, and their remaining customers quickly switched to us. Marco ended up serving some time in jail, though I'm not sure how much. Matteo vanished. The damage to the lot was minor and covered by insurance. Donald, delighted to see his old business thriving again, strutted around like a peacock. He occasionally offered suggestions, but made sure not to interfere. We now had a lot superintendent who also acted as a Spanish interpreter when needed. One of our mechanics was a recent graduate of a local trade school, while the other was more seasoned. They complemented each other perfectly. Emma quickly became adept at managing payroll and taxes. Paul and Grace visited us about once a month. It was nothing extravagant, but it was nice to have company. Donald had lost his wife over a decade ago, and they never had children, so he was always welcome when we had visitors. Clothes seemed to have vanished. After Emma moved in, we grew closer. Initially, we would just watch TV together after the boys went to bed. Sometimes we'd both doze off on the sofa and wake up cuddled together. We started giving each other kisses as a silent thank you for small favors. Before I knew it, I was giving her a peck on the cheek when she and the boys went out shopping or on some other errand. In early December, Emma mentioned that it was time for Richard to have his own room, and I readily agreed. That afternoon, she began moving her belongings into my room. I should have anticipated that. After tucking the boys in bed, she took my hand and led me to the bedroom. I felt a bit foolish for not catching on sooner, but also exhilarated by her taking the lead. The day before Christmas, we quietly tied the knot with the local justice of the peace. We kept it hushed, but Donald noticed Emma's new ring the next day. It made for a wonderful holiday. Our business thrived. When spring rolled around, Donald announced his plans to move to Florida. His sister had been urging him for years to join her near Ocala. I worried it might cause some issues, but Donald had everything sorted out. He handed over the property and the business to Emma and me. All we had to do was send him 10% of the monthly earnings until he passed away. It was an offer too good to refuse. He didn't need the money, having built up a comfortable nest egg over the years. It was more of a gesture, ensuring we'd always remember him. While not necessary, we appreciated the sentiment. The farmhouse provided us with much more space than our old apartment. It took a full month of repainting before we could move in. I never quite understood Donald's aversion to painting. The week we settled in, Emma discovered she was pregnant. Richard and Michael were overjoyed, and so was I. It's amazing to think how recently my life was in disarray. Funny how things turn out. I hope the new baby has 2 eyes. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.